we have a panel for you which is now going to explore this concept of teaching radical fairness. I would like to welcome onto the stage Lisa Bryant, Dr. Siobhan Hannan, and unfortunately Dr. Red Ruby Scarlett became very ill and had to be rushed into hospital for an operation. Slightly dramatic, but we wouldn't expect anything less. And I believe she's just come out of her operation, but her mother, Trish, is joining us, who has been a teacher for 30 years. So welcome, Trish. Come on up. Please welcome these three amazing women. And the way this is going to work, each of us is going to get up and give a very quick... We said 5? We timed it. It was like 6, 7. So no one time us. But if we can please start by welcoming Lisa Bryant.
Make it really hard by having two brilliant speakers precede us, Anthony. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. I said before we started that I always felt that Victoria's welcome to countries were the best that I heard in the country. I'd also like to thank Semann and Slattery, Colin and Anthony, and of course all their staff, because if it wasn't for them, none of us would be here now. I'm not a teacher and I'm not an educator, but I do know a little bit about education and care policy. And because of that, I know something, I know that the education and care sector in Australia is in a unique situation. Nobody knows what it is that we do. In fact, nobody particularly cares what it is that we do, apart from maybe the Victorian Department. Most of the time, we'll rail against this fact because it means that our sector is underfunded and our teachers and our educators are paid shite. But what if we use the fact that we fly under the radar? What, in fact, if we used our invisibility to change the world? Nelson Mandela said there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way at which it treats its children. So let me tell you a little bit about the way Australia treats our children. Almost 1 in 5 children in Australia live in poverty. Almost every fortnight, a child is killed in Australia by their parent. The leading cause of death for children between 5 and 17 is suicide. Some children in Australia are advantaged and some children are deeply disadvantaged. In Mount Druitt, a suburb in the western suburbs of Sydney, 31% of children live in poverty. In Double Bay, one of the richer suburbs on the eastern side of Sydney, only 6% of children do. As teachers and educators, I'm sure you know what happens when, say, it's morning tea and you've got an orange to share amongst 8 children and you cut it up into 8 pieces. Every child gets 1 piece, except if one child takes 2 pieces and then one child misses out. It's the same with wealth, it's the same with power, it's the same with privilege in our society. Somebody misses out if somebody gets more. Clearly, this is unfair, and this unfairness hurts children, it hurts adults, it hurts women, it hurts Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, it hurts people from CALD backgrounds, those who grew up, that weren't straight or, of a binary gender, and those with disabilities. Those who grow up or who are poor. It's unfair. It's deeply unfair. What happens though when you teach a whole generation a new thing? Luckily in Australia we've got an example of this. In the 1990s, Recycling was first taught in our schools in Australia, strangely enough by a recycling corporation. In 2020, though, we now have a group of young people who are passionate about climate change. They, are careful about what they purchase, and they recycle everything because of what they were taught when they were very young. What could happen then if we taught children about the unfairness in the world? If we made children absolutely attuned to and absolutely allergic to unfairness? How could we do that? By teaching about unfairness and fairness. By every person in this room making the need for a fair society the key thing they want to teach children. How? By pointing out unfairness, emphasising it, explaining it, making it obvious, naming it, giving children words to talk about it. By teaching children about the impact of economic inequity, gender inequity, racial inequity, inequity suffered by those with a disability. By giving them the skills to notice it. By making every intentional teaching moment a chance for children to notice fair and unfair. But mostly by asking children, getting children to notice their emotional response to unfairness. Because unfairness hurts. Knowing how unfairness hurts them will make children empathetic to any type of unfairness. Imagine if the children that we're teaching now became skilled at noticing unfairness, equipped to deal with it, helped to develop ideas about how to change it. That would be radical. In Australia, we expect way too much of our early childhood teachers and educators, and here am I, who is neither, giving you something more to do. But I don't want to be here in 20 years, still talking about childhood poverty in Mount Druitt. If we teach all children, both those with and without privilege, to be allergic to unfairness, maybe we can make it as unacceptable for unfairness to exist as it is to not recycle now. Radical fairness. Let's give it a go. Nelson Mandela also said that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Anyone up for a little bit of world changing? Thank you.
So I'm Siobhan Hannan and I'm a kindergarten teacher here in Melbourne. And I was asked to think about the idea of radical fairness and what it could mean for teaching. And these are my thoughts. Teaching radical fairness has to be about creating an experience of living fairness. It means children experiencing fairness, internalising the feeling of being treated fairly and of being fair to others. We know children don't learn through us telling them things. So we have to work out how to make the experience of being in early education one that is imbued with the experience of both receiving and giving fairness. Teaching radical fairness is about both receiving and giving. We want children to learn to stand up for themselves. That's receiving fairness. But we also want them to learn generosity, to care for those who have greater need. That's giving fairness. We want them to learn solidarity, standing up for ourselves collectively. One of the powerful ways we currently teach fairness is through integration of children with special rights. Children experience having to make allowances for others. An effective way to increase this experience would be to do more multi-ageing in children's services. We don't find it difficult to ask older children to yield to the younger child. In that context, our instinct is to make the more powerful person concede to the less powerful one. Teaching radical fairness means getting more comfortable with talking about power. Power is an elephant in the room. We know it's there, but we shy away from recognising it. It's an important thing to recognise and reflect on, so we need to clear that taboo and get better at talking about it. In thinking about power, I'd like to introduce the word subsidiarity. Used about government, subsidiarity means keeping powers at the lowest appropriate level, not pushing power up the ladder and disempowering lower rungs. If we apply it to early childhood education, I think it means letting power be with the smallest possible unit. It means valuing community management and teacher autonomy. I think we need to find some new ways to describe why we value these things because they're being eroded at the moment. It also means more power to children, which we like to call agency. For us as teachers, it means repudiating our own bossiness. It means adopting an ethic of hospitality. It means getting better at trusting children to be capable. Radical fairness means claiming back our power as educators, saying, no, we don't need more hierarchy, we don't need mazes of policy, we don't need someone to police how many observations we do per month. What we need is to be trusted and have time to think. Radical fairness also means ceding power to the children, because for children to learn about fairness, we need them to experience feeling empowered. We need them to see adults who are prepared to reflect and to change. One of the powers we must relinquish to create a fairer world is understanding what everyone else is saying. Radical fairness is multilingual. We're in one of the most multilingual nations on earth. There are so many children and educators who learnt another language before English, but we crush those other languages. We have to learn to cope with people around us speaking in other languages. We especially have to learn to treasure Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages and the people who speak them. The most important educators on the continent are the grandmothers who still speak the language of country to babies. Pushing Aboriginal children to attend preschool will not be a victory if it means they lose the chance to grow up knowing language. The elephant in the fairness room is economic inequality. This is another topic that's a bit socially unacceptable. Committing to radical fairness means committing to understanding the structures of society that create poverty. It means thinking about social class. It's so tempting to believe that success is a reward for effort. So tempting to believe that people can get out of poverty just by trying hard enough. But we can't be honest about fairness if we pretend money's not part of it. Nearly every kind of disadvantage you can think of comes with the side of poverty. Data shows us a range of disadvantages interfere with educational outcomes, and we like to tell ourselves that tackling those barriers will improve educational outcomes. And maybe they will if our goal is genuinely about better learning. But we have to be careful about believing that those better educated young people won't end up missing out on jobs. There's no guarantee you will get a go if you give it a go. If we still have the same ladder, somebody has to be on the bottom of it. No matter how many forms of prejudice we tackle, the structural inequalities that lead to poverty will still be there if we don't tackle them too. I think it's important not to be simplistic or naive about what's involved in creating a truly fairer world. But we can try to be more aware of how poverty affects families and children. We can try to make the world of early education one where wealth matters less. We can embrace frugality and create rich learning environments that rely on knowledge and relationships rather than blonde wood furniture and expensive wooden toys. We can engage politically to demand equality for all our children in facilities as well as ours. We can learn to know and care what happens to the children in poorer postcodes. We can call out the belief that poverty is contagious and encourage parents to choose the local school. We can treat children as citizens. That would be radical fairness.
Good evening, everybody. Oh, excuse me. Last year, I finished my 51st year of teaching with a Year 6 class. And one of the activities we do at the end of that year is to have the children think about what they'd like to do with their lives. 3 of my children wrote down that they would like to be activists. What brought me to the place where I thought it was so important to give that attitude to children? My daughter, Red Ruby Scarlet. and the challenges that she's thrown out to me. So tonight I'm a very proud mum to bring her words of challenge to you, as she can't do that herself. You can't learn if you don't feel good about yourself. You can't feel good about yourself if you think you're lesser. You can't feel good about yourself if you know that educators and systems can discriminate against you and your family. And there are those who do and can. You can't do this work alone. You can't do it without research-based resources. You can't do it without being an advocate on behalf of and an activist, creating new ways with and for. You can't get lost in social fear and moral panic. You can't do the work unless you're willing to challenge your own biases. You can't say, there are no bias issues here, or we've done anti-bias, so we're good. You've got to be committed to learning new theories, philosophies and worldviews, to understand anti-bias approaches in the here and now, but remembering that you probably need to learn more about where anti-bias comes from and how teachers have put it into practice before your generation. You need to know and remember that the EYLF is based on anti-bias goals. They were used to craft pages 11, 12 and 13, and the outcomes. Have a look. You've got to be committed actively to planning and following up to teach radical fairness. Think about Robinson and Joan Diaz's research about hierarchies of difference and how the illusion of inclusion is a way to get us all off the hook. But there is enormous discrimination, even in the good guys. You've got to be committed to learning. You have to understand that there has been Australian teacher research and research with teachers explicitly looking at how to create children who are all about social justice and anti-bias. And it clearly shows that developmental approaches are insufficient. Children have agency, and they chop and change as much as any human being based on desire and need. Paralysis isn't useful. Big deep breath and open yourself up to hearing what educated people are saying about unfairness, even if it's hard. Resist the moral panic in the media and get smart about knowing histories of the present or past presences in your work about fairness. After all, there is no cognitive development without fairness. So it's not a soft topic to mush about. You've got to be open to fairness being about more than humans. The world is not under human control. Decenter yourself and read the work of early childhood teachers and teacher researchers who have engaged with Indigenous cosmologies, like Tyson Yungaporta and Auntie Dr. Sue Atkinson, and post-human doings like Donna Haraway. They're good for you. Be open to receiving, urgently if you will. Make spaces and places your starting point and figure out what goes on there, with whom, and consider the knowledges of things other than human as serious knowledges and surrender to them. Remap the corridors of power and dive into the dirt. Teaching radical fairness is not an option. It's a must. So stay with the trouble.
Radical fairness rests on the assumption that the average, the non-interventionist, the apolitical, or the politically docile leaves much to be desired when it comes to constructing a quality early childhood curriculum. I'm going to suggest in my short time with you today on this stage that in part the tactics deployed in the past may serve us well into the future. However, in a changing world where childhoods share very little with our own experience of childhood, we must befriend the idea that radicalism is what we need when it comes to teaching children about the richness of identity, the politics which surround us, and inevitably the racism, the sexism, the misogyny, the transphobia, the homophobia, and the ableism, and that's just to name a few, that these children will encounter in their life course. For it must be taught that such isms must be challenged and never left unchecked in this world. I'm going to turn my gaze onto one of the barriers which teaching radical fairness may encounter. And this barrier does not come from families or children, nor the wider community. I'm going to be brave and say that sometimes one of the challenges in teaching radical fairness is the internal isms that some within our sector choose to mobilise in order to not take up a radical approach to teaching and learning. To teach radical fairness is to espouse a value of kindness in a way which is often difficult to measure, perhaps unnecessary though. However, the world is complex, and as the years go by, we encounter more evidence about the ways in which human beings are creating barriers amongst this species which should be united. We see growing evidence of human disputes which take the lives of not hundreds, but hundreds of thousands of people each year. As a species, our consciousness should be our driving force, which allows us to be more mindful of the importance of human connection, of love, and of compassion, whilst also being aware of how our behaviour impacts others we may come in contact with. These traits are the traits we need to survive as a species because it helps us bind together. But rather what we're witnessing in this world is a growing divide which leaves us feeling alienated, fearful, and sometimes at risk because of other people within our species. I know that we all yearn, well, I yearn for a world filled with greater love. I have a hope that this yearning can be realised through an early experience in life which teaches children that difference should not be feared, that those who maintain a different political, a different philosophical, or perhaps an ideological view from them that may not fit within our worldview must not be pushed to the margins, but rather we must create spaces to understand, to debate, and for dialogue to be created. For empathy must be what we need in order to restore our hope in humanity. And I'm going to take the position that this can be born in the sites that we all know as early childhood programs. We both have the skills and the resources and the intelligence to teach young children that fairness is a necessary companion in life, and that in fact we are required by our frameworks to embrace every child, every family for who they are, not for what we want them to be. Radical fairness requires each and every one of us to search deep into our own belief systems, to identify the challenges we may encounter and the phobias that we may have learnt. And we must ask ourselves in a straightforward way, but answer in a very truthful way, is there room in our sector for such beliefs? In a sector which embraces the belief that belonging, being and becoming are a central tenet in our quest towards quality. We are not perfect of humans, but we can aim towards greater love and connection with our fellow human and non-human species. In doing so, we may live in a world where connection is valued over human disconnection, where each and every one of us can thrive to our full potential. Early childhood sites are by default a political space because we make decisions each and every day about what we choose to do with and alongside young children. I urge you to think carefully about what you teach young children, about how you can contribute to a more peaceful, a more fair and equitable world. You can make a difference because you have the choice to do so. In closing, I want to suggest that sometimes it is important for each and every one of us to be the unwelcome guest at the dinner table. The guest who in the face of unfairness speaks up, not for any other reason, not because we want to be popular, but because we want to strive towards justice and equity, because this is the ultimate goal and sometimes popularity will suffer. It's nice to be loved, but it's more important to allow others to be loved. Thank you very much. You're all choking. What's happened? All right, we have some time because this is a panel. Would you like a glass of water? And I'm going to ask, we're going to have a bit of a conversation here. Why do you think we need to prioritise this over other things which may also be important in the lives of young children? Lisa?
I think because of the point we're in history, where if we don't prioritise this, we're seeing more and more wars develop, more and more. We know that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. We know that more stuff is happening right now that's causing problems for individuals. And so it just seems like it's urgent at this stage to actually work out what it is that we're doing. Are we just trying to create children to become adults? Are we just trying to take them on that trajectory of things that all human beings learn? Or are we trying to do it with something more important?
Siobhan, I have a question for you. The suburbs we live in are becoming more and more enclaves of sameness. However, do you think it's still relevant to say we need to reflect our community in our practice if our community is just the same? Is that sufficient?
No, it's not sufficient. It's not, because we're not teaching children to live in a bubble. We want them to live in the world, and more these days we are global citizens, especially a wealthy country like Australia that allows people the opportunity to travel the world and work overseas and so forth. I'm showing my materialist bias in saying that one of the reasons why radical fairness is imperative at the moment is that the kind of generosity and tolerance that we need to develop is an essential quality when you don't get to live in an enclave. And we may sometimes educate children whose lives are in a suburb that's samey, but they're actually part of a world that is diverse. And they will be citizens of a diverse world. And the more privileged they are, the less likely they are to have an enclosed life. And they will need to have the skills to go out into the world. And those skills include the skills of flexibility and tolerance and generosity, as well as the skills of standing up for themselves. So it's not it's a matter of finding the right kind of balance in the tension between both the receiving of fairness for me and the giving of fairness to others.
Trish, thank you for coming on to our panel.
No worries.
I have a question. Are you able to define radical for us?
Radical, I would say that radical, well, I have a daughter called Red Ruby Scarlet.
She's not radical.
I think that radical has many definitions, but I think it's stepping outside of the norm.
Yeah.
And for radical fairness, we're stepping outside of the norm and saying, what can we do that steps us outside of our comfort zone and steps children outside of their comfort zone and outside of the way we do things to make the way we do things better and more fair.
Can I ask each of you one final question? If you could have one wish around radical fairness within early childhood programs, what would it be?
I suppose for me, I'm a woman. I want to get to the stage where I don't hear services saying, oh, we don't have gender issues at our service. I want to get to the stage where I hear the sector taking some kind of pride in the fact that we're 97% women. I want to get to the stage where if I go into a centre, I really see a diversity of opinions and people on the walls, etc. I want to get to the stage where that horrible early childhood Facebook group isn't taken up in culture wars where people are saying we should celebrate Mardi Gras and other people are saying, oh no, why would you talk to children about sexuality? I want everyone in the sector to have enough knowledge and have enough education and have enough confidence in their knowledge and education to understand the importance of fairness.
Thanks, Lisa. Siobhan?
I'm really tempted to grab two here.
I'll give you a minute.
One of them is that I want people to get a better relationship with the idea of change so that when somebody suggests that things could be different, they don't take it as a personal insult. But they are more relaxed about, and feel more secure as well, about looking at how things could change and understand that learning is a process of change. And so the children that we're working with are always changing. Every single day they need to change. And we need to learn to do that alongside them and not get stuck in our ways. The other one is a more practical one, which is to do with the idea I mentioned before of becoming less stultifyingly Anglo-centric in the way that we do early childhood education. I'd love to see services actively seeking to put children and educators who speak the same language other than English together so that they can support each other in learning through that language rather than thinking that they need to separate them so that they can annihilate their language in favour of English faster.
Trish?
I think that my wish would be an appreciation both by the wider community and by you people yourselves about the very, very important role you people play. Like, I'm a primary school teacher. Because of my daughter, I've begun to have a lot of interaction with early childhood teachers, and oh my God, it's so obvious that you guys are the ones that have the child at the time when the attitudes are forming, and what you do is fantastic. I'm in awe of so much that is being done in this field.
Thank you.
What about you, Anthony?
Yes, what about you, Anthony?
I think my desire would be to increase the intellectual capital of our sector collectively so we become more aware of inequity. I'd also would like us to navigate our own biases in a way where we don't shame people for it, but we can name it up and help them, because I think shaming people's bias gets us nowhere, it just goes underground. So that would be my desire, is that we work on us before we work on children, because I don't think we have the power to work on children if we haven't dealt with our own stuff. And
That means another 20 years, though.
well, I think it was Jill McLaughlin who's in the audience here. I think it was you, Jill, who said broken people shouldn't break people. And I really think thank you. I think that's really important, that we work on us before we work on others. Hey, could you join me in thanking these amazing women?